guys got really quiet. That was amazing. Thank you guys for getting so quiet. I should have tried that before. I should have done that the whole time. Thank you, everyone, so much for this amazing day. This is incredible. Oh, nobody pay attention to Leslie Kane while she's up on stage again. All right. I became aware of Sharon Hewitt Rawlette just last year when she was recognized by the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, BICS, for her essay Beyond Death. She's now joined the board of BICS and continues to approach her work with an admirable breadth and depth. We're so happy to have her here with us today. Please help me welcome to the stage Sharon Hewitt Rawlette.
Good afternoon. I'm going to remove the mic from its stand. And I'm going to hope that my voice holds out. I'm getting over a cold. It really is a cold. I tested several times. It's not COVID. So hopefully it will hold out. I just first want to say how impressed I am with the warmth of the community that is present at this conference and the camaraderie of the discussions and the presentations. It's an amazing vibe that you guys put off, and it's a real pleasure to be invited here to talk to you today. So thank you very much to the people that made that happen. So I'm going to kind of circle back to some of the themes from Jeff Kripal's presentation at the beginning, and also some of the things that Kelly said in her introduction to Ralph's talk, where she was talking about meaning and paradigm change. And real quickly, I want to call out something that Jeff said when you talked about the tyranny of clarity. Is that the way you put it? Yeah, the tyranny of clarity. I was like, that is analytic philosophy, which is my discipline. Like that is the tyranny of our discipline, is that we want to be so precise. We want to label everything and put it into the form of logic or mathematics. But when it comes to these sorts of phenomena, it is very difficult to do that. And we miss so much if we start dismissing the things that we can't boil down to an equation of some form. But I am an analytic philosopher, so you're going to get a lot of theory from me today. I hope it's not too abstract, and that maybe it'll have some practical usefulness for you as well. I want to talk about maybe trying to start to sketch this new paradigm that we're talking about, that we want to find and we want to move toward. I think it's a paradigm that has been a long time in the making, and we've been searching for it, not necessarily consciously. Not everybody in the community, not everyone in the mainstream world has been searching for the paradigm change, but I think they've been struggling because we don't have that paradigm yet. And what I mean by that is, if we, again, go back to some things that Kelly said, we go back 100 years to when quantum theory was first being formulated. In these last 100 years, we have been trying within the science community and within philosophy of science to figure out what it means. What does this math mean? And this is something that everybody around the world knows that this exists, right? Quantum mechanics exists. It's not some fringe topic. It's this stuff that's in plain sight, and nobody can figure out what it's telling us about the nature of reality. People have different theories. We have some theories that say, well, it's consciousness, right? That conscious observation is what actually brings the world, the physical world, to a definite state. But then you have a lot of other physicists and philosophers of science that have other theories for how you explain it. You don't actually need consciousness to explain the observations that we've made. You have spontaneous collapse theories. You have the theory that's seeing a resurgence of interest now, Everett's many worlds theory. So lots of different ways of explaining this, and we haven't gotten any closer to a consensus about it in 100 years. We still don't know what's going on. And we're all talking about it still. At the same time that we've been struggling with that, we have been dealing with other big philosophical questions, like what is consciousness? what is it that we're experiencing? Why is it that there is something that it is like to be a sentient being, right? Why is there this sort of interiority to our experience of being some little piece of reality? And if we accept that there is something that it's like to be certain creatures or beings, why is it a particular way that it is rather than some other way? But philosophers like to say, why does the color red look the way that it looks instead of some other color? Or like the color blue, or, maybe these colors that near-death experiencers say that they experience in their near-death experience that are unlike anything that they've experienced in their earthly body. Is there any way that we can deduce from physical facts about somebody's brain and their body what their subjective experience is going to be like? Nobody has been able to do that. And in fact, there are philosophers who say that there is no way, because of the nature of physical facts, to deduce mental subjective facts from them. So what is the relationship between consciousness and the material world? We don't know. And one other big philosophical question that we've been wrestling with is the question of the place of value and ethics within the world. Are there certain states of the world that are objectively better than other ways that the world could be? Or is it all just personal preference? Or maybe cultural preference, or maybe species preference? Or is there something about, I got to figure out how to hold this mic in a consistent fashion. Is that good? Or that is, okay, I'm going to try to do this. So is our value and ethics an objective part of reality? And that's probably connected to the consciousness question, because a lot of thinkers find it plausible that you can't have value in a world if there's no conscious being to experience it or to enjoy that value. So if we're ever going to answer the value and ethics question, we're going to have to answer this consciousness question. And we haven't made any progress towards a consensus on any of them in 100 plus years. Well, I think actually that might change in the coming century. I think that we might be moving toward sort of a loosening of the old ways of thinking and a new and willingness to consider new ways of thinking about these questions. And one of the reasons that I think that is because I think there are a growing number of people within the mainstream research communities who are starting to understand the importance of a missing piece in answering all of these questions, and that's anomalous experience. And I think the fact that we see now headlines in major newspapers about UAPs, the fact that we see headlines about research into the effects of psychedelics are just two signs of the fact that even if those articles aren't allowed to talk about the really weird stuff, that lies behind these things, we all in this room, we know that consciousness is involved in these phenomena in a really crucial way, and that when you start researching them seriously, when you start experiencing them, your mind starts changing and the way that you think about reality starts changing. And so the fact that those subjects are at least on the front page from time to time, I think is an indication that there is a shift. It's still going to be slow probably, but I think there is hope that maybe in the next 100 years, we will start seeing new kinds of answers to these questions. We get a drink of water. So, what could this new paradigm look like? I don't think that we know in any detail yet, and that's why we're not there yet. Like Jeff was saying, if we just had a theory, then we might be able to make some kind of progress. And that really is the thing that's holding us up. I don't think we've found the critical insight that is going to crystallize everything for us. And suddenly, when we have that critical new perspective, we're going to look at all of these questions and be like, oh, yes, all the pieces fit together. Why didn't we think of this before? We're not there yet. And so there isn't a new compelling paradigm to move into yet. So it's really hard to drag people out of the old one when you don't have something concrete to offer them. It's new. So I don't know what that answer is, but I do have a hunch about the general direction in which it lies. And so that's what I'm going to try to share with you somewhat briefly here. I think that the critical insight lies somewhere in the neighborhood of the fact that there is a global, non-local organizing principle in our universe that acts directly at the level of meaning. So it's not, it's not localizable in space or time. It has a global influence, and that influence is directed toward the creation of meaningful experience. So let's see, I'm gonna skip a little bit because we are running low on time. But so I think this is a pervasive principle that's underlying everything that we're experiencing. Kind of like quantum mechanics is underlying everything we're experiencing, but we don't recognize it except in very particular situations that bring out the specific qualities of that underlying process. Now, almost everybody in this room has probably experienced those situations yourself. You're well aware that you have experienced them. But I think there are a lot more people in this world who have experienced situations like this, and they've just dismissed them because the scientific model that they are working with has said that they can't be anything except for chance or a mere coincidence. And a big part of what I have tried to do in my professional career in the last few years is to rehabilitate the reputation of coincidences. Because coincidences, at bottom, are signs of order in places where we didn't expect to find any. They're clues to forms of order that we haven't yet understood. Now, it could be that some of them are meaningless, some of them are random, absolutely, and we need careful statistical methods to help us understand which ones are meaningful and which ones aren't. But if we just assume from the get-go that nothing that lies outside of our current scientific paradigm could be meaningful, then we are missing a huge opportunity to learn about what our current theories are missing. Oh, okay. So coincidences are there are windows into the way that this pervasive influence that explains our very extraordinary experiences is actually working at the level of the everyday. And it's something that I'm getting lost. Let me go back to return to my notes for a moment. So coincidences have this very valuable informational quality, okay, that all of our paranormal experiences, I think, have because of the way that they lie outside of our current paradigm. But I do think that coincidences themselves are important, particularly because they show us the everyday quality of the extraordinary. Right? They lie on that boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary, and they help us see how the extraordinary experiences might be part of something that weaves throughout our existence. And maybe in the end, there's some way that we can explain even the ordinary phenomena that we experience by way of this thing that we only discovered through the extraordinary. So there are lots of different kinds of coincidences. There are lots of different proximal sources for them. There are lots of different effects that they can have on our lives and different kinds of significance that they can hold for us. I did write like a 600-page book on the topic. So I'm not going to be able to go into any of those details here today, but I want to focus on something that all of those, well, at least a large majority of those coincidences have in common, and that they have in common with the more extraordinary experiences that we've had as well. And that's this grounding in this meaning-based organizing principle I was talking about. So let me talk first a little bit about the holistic, non-local nature of that principle. We're used to the fact that psi is spatially non-local, right? That you can experience something at a distance, you can get information at a distance, or maybe even affect something at a distance without there being any signal passing in between. But something that's really striking when you start trying to figure out how a coincidence was created is that it's very hard to find a temporal origin for that event. There seems to be this weird, there's this weird sort of circularity that I think Jeff was bringing out in his story about the woman who had precognitive vision, but then the vision itself caused the event to come about. So where do you get, what came first? The chicken it's the chicken or the egg problem. What came first? We don't know. There's also a great example that I like to use, a classic coincidence story that comes from a book written by Dr. Kirby Surprise called Synchronicity. And he talks in that book about how years ago when the movie Carrie first came out, maybe some of you remember that. I was too young to see scary movies at that time, so I didn't see that movie in the theaters. But when it first came out, he was sitting in his car waiting to pick up a friend, and he heard a radio advertisement for the movie. And he had actually already seen the movie, so he knew that it was about this teenage girl who can affect objects with her mind. And in fact, in the climactic scene of the movie, she actually crushes her family's house with her psychic ability. So he's hearing this radio announcement, and he looks across the street from where his car is parked, and he sees this house, and he starts fantasizing to himself about what it would be like to move an object that enormous with his mind. And he also apparently had recently seen a National Enquirer headline about this house that was apparently tipped over on its side by a psychic force. So he's like thinking specifically about tipping over a house with his mind. And as he's thinking about this, the house that he is looking at starts shuddering and it tips over. Okay, so like if he's looking at this, the top of the house comes down and now he's staring straight at its roof. So that was a little freaky. So he said he had to do a little reality checking to make sure that he was awake, and but he decided that he was, and then very bravely he said, okay, if I just did that, then I want to see the house crushed the way that it was in the movie. And he says that indeed the house was crushed, that it started imploding from the top. And as it was imploding and, reducing in volume, he sees this little flash of yellow from behind. This yellow bulldozer pulls up from behind the house where he wasn't able to see it and climbs up on top of the pile of rubble. So he has this extraordinary experience that he asks to have, but without breaking any of the known laws of physics. And in fact, in a way that was so ordinary that anybody walking by on the street wouldn't have noticed anything strange happening. It was only strange for him, because of the way that the different events in his life and his internal wish that he had made lined up in this crazy fashion. If we try to figure out how they came together in that way, it gets really tricky. You could say, well, maybe precognition had something to do with it, and maybe he sort of like intuited that he was going to see this, which caused him to form the wish. But in this particular case, the wish was actually caused more directly, it seems, by the fact that he heard the radio advertisement and that he had seen the movie and he had seen the National Enquirer headline. There are these other causes for that wish. So if the demolition of the house was sort of the instigating event, then it was going to have to not only cause his wish back in time, but it's going to have to go back in time and somehow make sure that that movie had been produced at the right time that it could be advertised to him. So that might seem like a bit much. So maybe you think, well, the movie came first and it was advertised and it made Kirby Surprise make this wish. And then somehow his wish then went back in time to set up the demolition of the house in the right place so that he would see it. Or maybe the demolition of the house and the movie somehow were set up independently. And then once that was going to happen, then Kirby Surprise gets brought in and makes sure that he sits in exactly the right spot in the parking lot so that he can see this without seeing the bulldozer behind the house. I think it makes a lot more sense, instead of trying to shoehorn this explanation into our normal spatiotemporal causality, to say that whatever is creating this experience is working from outside of space-time, or it's working in all of space-time at the same time. And that's what Carl Jung thought too. So, he coined the term synchronicity, and the way he defined it was an acausal connecting principle. And I think he said acausal particularly because he was thinking about spatiotemporal causation. And I think we can actually think about this organizing principle as causality. Maybe it'll turn out that that's not the best way to think about it, which is sort of why I've said organizing principle rather than a different type of causation. But for the moment, just sort of think about what it would be like to think about causation instead of as a process where we explain what happens now by the state of the world, 1 moment ago, and then we explain what happened then by what the state of the world was a moment before that, where the explanation is in order of temporal priority. What if instead we explained events by the meaning that they create, and the meaning is where you start. That's the basis of the explanation. And then it's all of the other events backwards in time or even forward in time are set in place to make that meaningful event fit inside of a spatiotemporal order that may help our consciousness in other ways, right? And it help us to order our perceptions and communicate with one another. But it's not that that event, that meaningful event, happened because all this stuff happened before. All that stuff happened before so that this meaningful event could happen. It happened in the way that they did so that this event could happen. Now, another interesting aspect of this organizing principle theory that I'm trying to work out is that it seems like it kind of surveys all of the different possibilities that there are for creating a specific meaningful event. And then it chooses the one that is going to create the least disturbance for all of the other meaningful experiences that people need to have, whether that same person or other people. So it's operating by the path of least resistance, or least disturbance, right? It's choosing the most ordinary means of creating an extraordinary experience. Now, this is, like I said, this is just a hypothesis right now. But if it's true, but really is working in something like this way, it has a lot of implications for how we understand these phenomena. And in particular, it would help us explain why, with these very extraordinary experiences, these blatantly paranormal things that happen, why they're so elusive, why it's so difficult to pin them down, why it's so difficult to find hard proof that a wide public is going to accept. One of my French colleagues, a fellow named Laurent Kasprowicz, he's a sociologist. He studies phone calls from the dead. And actually, we just collaborated on a book in French, not in English yet, but maybe we'll get there in the next couple of years, called Phénomène, and it's specifically about elusivity in UFO phenomena, but also more widely in parapsychology. But his specialty is in phone calls from the dead and in all kinds of technologically mediated messages that seem to be coming from the deceased. And he talks about the way that some of these messages do get recorded, right? That we have recordings of them that happen on, answering machines in the old days, but these days you get voicemail messages. But a weird thing that happens is that they often spontaneously erase themselves, right? So you listen to it once, maybe twice if you're lucky, and then it's just gone with no explanation about who erased it or why. It hasn't happened to any of your other messages that they spontaneously get erased, but that one that you cared about so much, that one disappears. But that could be explained if these phenomena are being produced by a principle that is simultaneously balancing the needs and desires of many different agents, not all of whom want to be confronted by incontrovertible proof that there is an afterlife, right? And maybe their desires matter. Maybe the kind of life that people want to live insulated from these phenomena, maybe that does have an effect on the kinds of proof that are available to them, not just because they're, walking away from it, right? But because that proof simply will not manifest itself to them in the same way. They're having an actual influence on the objective reality that surrounds them. And then the final thing that I wanted to comment on about this organizing principle is that when we're working with such a holistic, non-local phenomenon, it's really difficult to separate out the contributions that are made by individual agents. We're talking about somehow all of our wishes and desires getting mixed together. It's really difficult to figure out when you have an experience, what part of it is your own wishes, desires, fears, projections of other kinds, because we know that we are, as human beings, we are psychically powerful. We are able to create change even in the quote-unquote objective world. So when we're experiencing these things, how do we know how much of it is us making this experience for ourselves and how much of it is coming from a realm that is beyond our own wishes and desires and projections? I think this is a really big difficulty within the field of evidence for survival of death. I don't think it's agreed that this is a big part of the discussion, is how much of this communication that happens with souls supposedly on the other side, how much of it is just coming from the fact that we so much want to have the experience of communicating with our departed loved ones, and how much of it is because they still exist and they want to communicate with us. I do actually think that there is evidence that we do survive death and that we are able to communicate with our loved ones here. But I think at the same time that it's really important to keep in mind that there is always this dichotomy, or it's not a dichotomy because that involves the fact that there's two separate things. There's always this mixture of the objective and the subjective in every experience. one of the helpful ways that I have found to kind of keep that subjectivity and objectivity in mind is to think about all of these experiences, whether it's synchronistic experiences or paranormal experiences, or even normal everyday experiences. I don't have anything strange about them. To think of them as dreams. And that's not, I think Jeff was saying this too earlier, that's not to say that they're not real. It's not to impugn their reality in any sense, because I think dreams have a very important reality to them. And in fact, our waking reality may just be a very coherent, long-running dream. I'm not saying they're not real by any means, but with dreams, we are already very much aware of how ambiguous they are, right? We know that there is this whole part of the dream world that is wishful thinking or playful imagination, trying out different possibilities. But at the same time, we know that you can get real psychic information in a dream, right? That there is a way for information to come to you from somewhere outside. The dream even seems to facilitate that in a way. Maybe the ambiguity of the dream somehow facilitates it in some way. And we know that dreams are full of symbolism, that things aren't always what they seem in dreams. I think all of those things are also true of waking life. It's just easier to forget it. But all of that stuff is mixed up in our waking life. So when we ask about an experience that we had, was it real or was it just a dream? I don't think that's actually the right question. Because reality is a dream in the sense of it is external to us, but also internal to us. Both of those things at once. And even if our paranormal encounters are verifiably as physical and solid as the yellow bulldozer that caused Kirby Surprise's experience, even if we have people who are dying from bacterial infections that they received from an encounter with another life form, even they can be that real and solid, and that doesn't accept them from also being susceptible to interpretation or even needing interpretation. The fact that they can have a deeper meaning, that they can be speaking to you in a very personal, symbolic language at the same time that they are, quote unquote, objective and real. I think there comes a point when we're doing science that we have to shift from asking questions that are purely in terms of physics and purely in terms of mathematics, and we have to start asking existential questions. If we want to progress in our understanding of the physical world, we're going to have to start asking questions about meaning and value, because they're not separable. As has been emphasized previously, I think by Kelly, everything is connected, right? All of space, all of time, seen are connected. You and I are connected. All of our minds are connected to uncountable many other minds, human and non-human, and we're all connected in this web of meaning making that is reality. I think I'll stop.